All right, so here's the idea. On the left side, we have the initial visit to Bartok UI, and on the right side, we have return visits. On this first visit, basically, we're just accessing the root index HTML. The root index HTML is going to be loaded into the browser from the server. So this is a little bit simplified. I'm not showing that the code's coming from the server, but essentially like the code is going to be loaded into the browser from the server on number one. From there, we're going to go to number two, which is Bootstrapping Code, and that is going to be loaded from the source repository. And essentially what that's going to do is load up the service worker and first look at the service definition, because the service definition should be telling us that we're going to be using a particular service worker or something along those lines. Actually, I take that back. The initial load is going to be telling us that we're using the service worker. But one of the first tasks after loading the Bootstrap code is going to be to load the service definition. That's going to say to the service worker, hey, I've got 5 endpoints that I need to be set up, or however many endpoints I need to be set up, and you need to go get the source code for that. So anyways, here we are in the service worker, and that's number 4. And that's going to lead us to number 5, where we go to the service source and start loading all those services in there. 6 is just going to be putting all of that into IndexedDB, where the service worker can use it on later visits. So that brings us to a return visit. The return visit, I will go to the URL. That won't actually go to the server because that'll be loaded up by the service worker. The service worker will say, hey, I have all these endpoints, and hopefully all of the endpoints that are needed, and those are going to be loaded from IndexedDB, and then we have a fully offline app. Now, there's nothing in here listed about like how to register new APIs or new content to be served up from the service worker. That's actually going to be part of the framework itself, at least for the Bartok implementation. This pattern can be applied to many different sites, but I think I'm going to try to get it right with Bartok, and I'm going to try to keep as much of Bartok code as I can out of this pattern because of that exact reason. Maybe I might want to use this pattern elsewhere. The way this differs from what I've seen the service worker used before is that most of the time I've seen people kind of hardwire the service worker, and what I'm hoping for is a dynamic implementation of a service worker, the service worker state should allow for a dynamic app. The service worker itself won't be dynamic, but it'll load code dynamically. An example of that would be, let's say we supported something called to-do. So the to-do would be loaded up under /to-do. That might actually serve an index HTML file up from the service worker. So routing is going to be one of the things that this service worker handles, and delivering code from that route is going to be handled. So essentially we're looking at this like it's a server, and any given app that uses this pattern would set up its own versions of what needs to be sent out. But there will be an API so that as you're operating the entire app, you could actually access that API and set up new routes. So that's where Bartok is going to utilize this very well, because Bartok needs to set up lots of different services, and those services may have a bunch of different files that they load depending on the route. But essentially, everything you see in an Express app or Express server should be sort of closely mimicked in this service worker, except for think of it as an Express app that you could call back to the server and say, hey, server, I need you to make something available at /to-do. I think that pretty much says everything I want to say. I think if I get this particular part built, I could use it to service what I know of as the Bartok UI. The Bartok UI right now is everything it takes to create Visual Studio. So I think at that point, if I get this particular thing built and I get all the services loading from the server here into this particular pattern, I think it'll give me the ability to, at some point, deploy a app infrastructure, or sorry, an app component in a way that like allows me to develop Bartok in Bartok, and that's one of the big drives right now. This loading files in a sort of dynamic way and handling routing within the service worker is pretty huge, and this being able to make the routing and the files that are served up by that is pretty huge as well. It's more extensible. Anyways, that's pretty much it.